Welcome to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm the creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh Podcast is founded in the lineage of the special operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is produced in partnership with Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm focused on helping you optimize the people side of your business. We're sponsored by Jersey Mike's Subs. Together, we share the mission of giving, making a difference in someone's life. Visit the Jedburgh Podcast, Talent War Group, and Jersey Mike's Subs on the web and on all social media. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation.
Unified sports is people with and without disabilities playing on the same field, playing on the same team against other teams of similar makeup. And that whole unified sports approach has opened up the doors for inclusion. And so really now Special Olympics is for everyone.
We can make a difference if we open up our hearts and our minds to people who are different. And that's today in society, it's more than people with intellectual differences.
Inclusion has to be there to be accepted. If you haven't been included, they're not going to understand your journey. They're not going to understand what's important to you, and you're ultimately not going to be accepted. So I think this inclusion revolution is critical to the future that we all want to live in.
The revolution is inclusion. 50 years ago, Eunice Kennedy Shriver declared she had enough of seeing those with intellectual disabilities be put down and shunned by society. So in 1962, she opened Camp Shriver with 36 campers and became the first summer camp dedicated to providing and promoting the athletic abilities of those with intellectual disabilities. By 1968, Eunice grew her camp into the first International Special Olympics Games of over 1,000 athletes in 200 events. Today, the Special Olympics exists in every corner of the globe and has supported over 5 million athletes. For this episode, I traveled to Minneapolis to sit down with the leaders of the 2022 and the 2026 USA Special Olympic Games. Joe Dzaluk led the 2022 Games in Orlando and through partnership with Jersey Mike's set a record and a new standard for fundraising and financial support to the Games. Jersey Mike's CEO Peter Cancro is an original member of our Jedburgh team and told me time and time again that his commitment to the Special Olympics would be all-encompassing and equal to at least the amount of sales during Jersey Mike's annual Day of Giving. For March 30th, 2022, that number was $20 million. I watched as Joe passed the baton to Christine Sovereign and David Dorn to lead the 2026 Games in Minneapolis. Christine will serve as the CEO and Dave is the president of the Special Olympics Minnesota chapter. Joe, Christine, David, and I cover the history of the Special Olympics. We talk about Eunice Kennedy Shriver's call to action, and we discuss Special Olympics' place as the leader of inclusion before inclusion was even a term in mainstream society. We also discuss the success of the 2022 Games, Peter Cancro and Jersey Mike's unprecedented leadership and the example they set in giving, and what we can expect in 2026. I've never been to Minneapolis, but I can assure all of our listeners we'll be back to cover the Games in a couple of years. Take a listen on your favorite podcast platforms. Watch the full video version of my conversation with Christine, Joe, and David on YouTube. Listen to us and follow at Jedburgh Podcast on all social media. Check out our website, jedburghpodcast.com. Learn more about the Special Olympics and get involved at specialolympics.org and follow them on social media at Special Olympics. Christine, Joe, Dave, thanks for joining me on the Jedburgh Podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks for hosting us here in Accenture.
Oh,
Christine.
you're welcome.
So this is an amazing setup. We're here in the conference room, but just a great opportunity to look out across Minneapolis, all right, which I have to admit, and some of my friends will now tell me that I'll owe a case of beer for admitting this public, but it's my first time that being in Minneapolis.
Oh, well, an especially warm welcome to you then.
And warm weather, so good timing on your part.
Well, we got off the plane last night, and I had actually expected it to be cold.
Oh,
I don't know
come
why, because everybody
on.
says it's the Midwest, it's cold. It's like, no, it's still August.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of athletes coming here in 2026, which I know we'll talk about later, but their first reaction on the video was they're going to have to bring warm coats, you know?
Yes.
So,
No, I will tell everybody right now, it's hot.
yeah.
It's hot. I needed more shorts. But this is a great group. And this was a great opportunity as I was speaking with our mutual friend, Amy Wise, who the folks at Jersey Mike's, our title sponsor, connected me with, and Jeff Hemshot connected me with Amy. And we started talking about how do we tell the story of Special Olympics and where the organization has come from. And then she said that everybody was getting together this week here in Minneapolis. And I said, great. I've wanted to go to Minneapolis. We're going to be doing a couple of episodes there. So let's get everyone together and we're going to have this conversation about the 2022 games. We're going to talk about the 2026 games. Christine, you're the CEO of the 2026 games. Your day job is running this office here at Accenture.
Correct.
You've been here your whole career. Joe, you're out of the hot seat. I think you're about an hour away, right? I think I'm the only thing standing between you and some level of freedom.
That's about right, yes.
Because you had your hand up and you're going to go back to Florida, but you led the 2022 games. We're going to talk about that wildly successful event. Okay, and Dave, you're coming into the hot seat along with Christine, but you're the president of the Special Olympics in Minnesota.
Right.
And so now you are charged with having to put a lot of this thing together across the state. And we're going to talk about the construct of the Special Olympics, that there's an international body, but it is state and regionally run. And I thought that was really interesting. It's something that I learned through my conversations with Amy and everyone. But if I'm ready, I'm ready. If you're ready,
We're ready.
Okay, let's
Ready.
go.
Let's go.
So sometimes I have to ask myself if I'm ready. I don't even know. Let's talk about the history and about this organization. It's been 50 years, recently celebrated the 50-year anniversary.
Right.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver started Camp Shriver in Maryland, June 1962. She received that call of a mother of a child with an intellectual disability who couldn't find a camp for her child, and she said, this is enough. And now I'm going to define enough, because for her it meant exactly what it meant for my grandmother, my mother, and now my wife, which is do something about it. Yes. We've had enough. Let's do something about it. Dave, you've been with the organization for 17 years.
Right.
Can you talk about the history and where it came from?
Sure. Like you said, it started in Eunice Kennedy Shriver's backyard. And, now it has grown over those 50 years to be in 170 countries. It's 5 million athletes around the world. And it's just come such a long way with more sports, more athletes, and actually, more purpose than what most people really think about. Most people think about it's just a track and field event, and now you see it is really a movement about inclusion. And I know we're going to talk about that, but when you first say Special Olympics, it's got great brand recognition because of the history behind it and all the great things that have happened. But most people think it's a track and field event. Mm-hmm. And they don't really realize, and they think it's a track and field event for kids with Down syndrome. I mean, That's what people think of. And so there's a great affinity towards it or affection towards it, but they don't really know the whole scope. And that's probably our biggest challenge, even after 50 years, is what is Special Olympics all about? So something like this is great because it helps us spread the word, because in more recent years, it's not a movement or an organization that's doing something for a certain population. It is really a movement for everybody. Mm-hmm. Unified sports is people with and without disabilities playing on the same field, playing on the same team against other teams of similar makeup. And that whole unified sports approach has opened up the doors for inclusion. And so really now Special Olympics is for everyone, and it is for every age, and it's in every community. And that's the big shift. And the real big push, and where you get the best change, is going to that younger generation. And so the Unified School program is really where you're seeing the huge push for growth, and that's in schools where they have unified clubs, unified sports, unified student leadership. And when I say unified, again, just to repeat myself, it's students with disabilities and students without disabilities. And quite frankly, the makeup is probably 75% without disabilities, 25% with disabilities. But it's the students with disabilities that are the catalysts, because they bring everybody together and they show everybody, anybody can do this, and anybody can be a part of this movement.
Well, one of the mantras of the Special Olympics, and I can quote it here, is Special Olympics strives to create a better world by fostering the acceptance and inclusion of all people.
For sure.
And I thought that was really important. And there's actually another clause here that says the goal is to reach that there's over 200 million people who live with intellectual disabilities worldwide, 6.5 million here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And the goal of the Special Olympics is to reach out to every one of them and their families. But it takes a certain type of person to be involved in this organization. I want to go around really quickly and ask you why you got involved, because you come from different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. I mean, Joe, we're going to talk about the 2022 games, but you have an entire career that you built in information technology at IBM, leading global teams, which we could do a whole podcast on what your career was before we got into it, because this is what we talk about on all of our shows, is about how do we build these global organizations that affect change. And you did that for 30 years at one of the leading technology firms. And now 4 years ago, you get involved with this organization. Why?
Yeah. So a question's been asked. So it happened about a dozen years ago, but I volunteered for the first time for Special Olympics. So it kind of hit my halfway point in my career and in my life. I just wanted to give back. It sounds a little contrite or corny, but I wanted to give back, and I knew some people involved with Special Olympics, and so I volunteered. And as happens with most people who volunteer, they said, wow, this is great. We can make a difference if we open up our hearts and our minds to people who are different. And that's, today in society, it's more than people with intellectual differences. You can say, just if we could all open up our hearts and our minds and accept people who are different, it's better for us, it's better for society, and it's kind of a win-win. So I got involved because I enjoyed it and because I was giving back. But really what kept me coming back was I could say I could make a difference.
Yeah.
But it felt good. So,
yeah, when you look out and you see the impact. I mean, Christine, what about for you?
Well, for me, Special Olympics has been in my life, my whole life, literally. My sister was born with an intellectual disability, specifically Down syndrome. And I often say Special Olympics found our family. We were fortunate enough that in one of the early childhood things that we got involved with, or got Katie involved with, somebody made us aware of Special Olympics. And at that time, she was less than 8. You have to be 8 to start competing. And I specifically remember her marking the calendar, right, waiting for her 8th birthday to be able to start to participate. And so we brought Katie to a track event, her first event when she was 8 years old as a family, and it's been part of our lives ever since. I've been an athlete, or I've been a unified partner. Yep. I've been a volunteer. I've been a coach. I've been a board member of Special Olympics Minnesota. So really the opportunity to take on the leadership position for the 2026 games is just passion meets purpose for me. So excited about the opportunity and to give back in such a meaningful way.
Dave, what have you learned over 17 years of being involved with it?
I've learned a lot of things, but I would say the capability of the human spirit is amazing. And the way I got involved with Special Olympics was 17 years ago. That was my first event. Was the first day I was on the job, and it was because my wife and I had adopted a child who had special needs, and looking for something for her to get involved in. And Ro was 10 at the time. And so you just see, we're even guilty of it, selling our own child short of what she was really capable of doing. And so seeing what our athletes, can do is, it was one big learning. The other big learning was, there are so many good people in the world that I do this for a job, but they don't. They volunteer, and they come out day after day, week after week to coach, to help run things. And we couldn't do it without them, but they do it out of the goodness of their heart, and it is super humbling. And to see so many people that are givers, and it just makes you. It just makes you, feel like you could step up your game a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Special Olympics has used the term intellectual disability. Right. Can you define what intellectual disability is, and how and why that term is important?
I would say, and I'll defer to Christy and Joe too, but intellectual disability has changed over the years, I think. And, way back when I was a kid in school, it was people that, were very very distinctly had learning issues or were very different, and they were put in a different room than everybody else, and it was very isolating. And over the years, I think what we've seen, and we saw this with our daughter, is you're quote unquote mainstreamed, and you're in classes with other students, and you work with the shortcomings, and it's much more accepting, not inclusive necessarily, but much more accepting. So we don't really set, there's some, I think in the past there used to be like an IQ, line. And if you were above that line, you didn't have an IEP or in a school, or you didn't consider to have a disability. If you're below, you did. And I think that's probably still true in some areas, but for Special Olympics as an organization and a movement about inclusion, we take everybody, and it doesn't matter where you are in your sports capabilities. You could run the 50-yard dash in 8 seconds, or you could run the 50-yard dash in 8 minutes. We're still going to take it, and you're still going to have a competitive experience. And we don't, and so we have a wide range of abilities with all of our athletes, and we don't discern that here you have a disability and here you do not. Right. It's especially when you look at the spectrum now, right? With the autism spectrum, there is such a wide range of just different traits and different capabilities that we just open our doors up to anybody who wants to participate.
Joe?
Yeah, I think Dave said it well. There is no official definition, or at least if there is, it's not practiced. And it's we're inclusive, and we talked a little bit about ages, and Christy mentioned the age of 8. We now have the young athletes program, so starting at the age of 2.
Oh, wow.
We now have programs, and we have a large percentage because we're trying to quickly, especially to help with our athletes or with those with intellectual differences, help with their social skills, their motor skills, which we all know if you catch them earlier on in life. Right. And by the way, we do have some athletes. We had an athlete of the 2022 games who was in his 80s.
Really?
And a couple in their 70s. So we are, just talk about stereotypes. It's not just a bunch of kids track and field or playing kickball. That's not what we're at. So whether or not it's what type of difference do you have intellectually? Many of our athletes have some physical challenges, but we're open to all.
I wanted to ask about the different common types of disabilities. Christine, you mentioned that your sister has Down syndrome, but there's also Fragile X, autism. You mentioned the spectrum. Yeah. There really is no limit as to what Special Olympics is willing to work with.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Differing abilities. What were you just telling me that Tim Shriver was calling it, the nomenclature that he was trying?
Just differences as opposed to disabilities, right?
Differabilities.
Differabilities, yes, differabilities, because, especially here in society today, as I mentioned, we're all different, right? To some of them, Down syndrome is more obvious, right, than other differences. But we know, especially if society could just be more open to people who are different, it would be great. I met a young athlete right before the games, and I said, what would you like to get out of the games or get out of Special Olympics? And he says, what I would like is when I'm in the supermarket and I'm walking down the aisle and people see me, they don't turn away. Mm. That's what he wants. That's a simple request. And I think sometimes when we see people on the street who are different or wherever, I know I do have a tendency to want to avoid something that might be a little uncomfortable based upon our predetermined notions as to what we should be comfortable with.
And I think if you go back in history, if you go back 50 years ago, and I'm sure if we think about, when we were kids, that's the reaction that so many people have, that you don't engage with that person, don't look at that person's different. The first camp that I mentioned in the Open had 34 kids, 26 counselors, almost a one-to-one relationship. And then July 1968 hosts the first International Special Olympics Games in Soldier Field, Chicago. 1,000 athletes, 200 different events. It was described as daybreak. is what they've termed that, because that was the first time that people with these disabilities were put into the mainstream, brought together.
Yes.
Doing exactly what you just brought up, forcing everybody to look and say, look, these are real people who we can interact with and who can do great things. That moment, 1968, that defined now and set this organization off on this trajectory that has really led and pioneered at a time when we didn't have terms like diversity, inclusion, equity. DEI didn't exist. I mean, that's really a new initiative here in the last couple of years. Not that it's taken too long, for sure. Why has the Special Olympics been able to lead in this inclusion, diversity, equity conversation for so long?
Let me just go back to 1968.
Yep.
I have a picture in my office of the games and a picture from Camp Shriver. And so let's just think about this. It's 1968 in Chicago. Forget the Special Olympics. 1968 in Chicago. Those were tough times in our nation's history. And the picture I have of Eunice Shriver is an athlete just finished running a race. She went and gave him a hug. Athlete happened to be black. And there she is, just big old hug. She didn't see colorblind. Well, our nation in 1968 had obviously some challenges in that area, and she didn't see that, and she set that example, and it was that kind of in your face, right? By the way, she had problems getting some permits to hold the games. She was denied, and she got some assistance from some people. She got it. So she was constantly pushing, and because she had some support from her family, and her family had a lot of influence, she took advantage of that to push the envelope to get people to open up their eyes and their hearts. And so I think why Special Olympics now with her son, Tim Shriver, our leader and our chairman, he's done the same thing. So I think you had this family that's dedicated to service, who just constantly pushes and pushes people. I think that's been a big part of it. And then, as you said, I think the more people who have gotten involved in our program, whether or not they're volunteers or sponsors or partners, it's just been great. And then we keep growing, but we have lots more to do.
I think there's three things that I reflect on. I think first, sport is so unified.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at the Olympics themselves every 4 years that brings together every country, right? And sets aside political and social differences and all that to unify through sport. So that's Special Olympics, number one. I think number two, it celebrates ability. It's putting these athletes on a stage that have all of us just take note of the incredible things that they're overcoming and the success that they're having. And I think third, it's courage at a very visual level. Mm-hmm. The Special Olympics oath, which we start everything with, the athletes always start with, talks about, if I can't win, let me be brave in the attempt. And you watch this courageousness and you watch this bravery, and it's you can't help but be, so proud and so celebratory about what they're accomplishing.
I mean, I think you're right. And I was going to say the same thing about sport. I mean, a lot of us have seen the commercial, and I don't know what product it is, but they're in the bar, and there's the guy in the business suit and then the guy with the spiked hair, and they're watching the game, and, they get caught up in the emotion and they hug, and, sport is a level playing field, and you can celebrate. And so it brings people together. And it's easy to volunteer. You're watching, you're cheering. It's a very easy entry point for people to see something different. The other thing is, for 50 years, to build on all the things that you were saying, Christy, after 25 years or so, just listening to the voices of the athletes, because seeing what they can do. And it's the same message that we all have. We all want to belong, right? We all want to be included in things. And so the beginning of the unified sports, and not being just an organization that creates acceptance, but actually promotes inclusion, and seeing that now really being pushed in the schools, and that's where our biggest growth engine is right now over the past 10, 15 years. And it's the youth of today that are breaking down that final barrier. And, so inclusion has been, to your point, we're seeing such a powerful change in school culture, lunchrooms, absenteeism, bullying, all that stuff is in schools that are promoting the unified, in movement and unified champion schools. They're seeing big changes. And that is, so that's where, to your point, this inclusion, has become a big part of the movement before, and it just rolls into the community.
That's a very interesting point about the schools that I'm actually going to take home with me now. And my daughter's going into 8th grade this year. And I'm actually going to go ask that question.
I love it.
And ask, where are we and where is the school with this?
And that's the goal. Like you had mentioned that earlier. Our goal is to get into every school here in the state of Minnesota, and every state is pushing the same way in the Special Olympics movement, is to get into every school, because those kids, no matter where they are, they're part of the club. I mean, those unified clubs, like I said, most of them are kids that do not have intellectual disabilities, but they're kids in a lot of times that would not be in anything else, right? They're not. It's made up of every walk of life in the school culture, which is, and the athletes are the catalyst. But they graduate, and then they go on into the workforce, and you know what? Now they're more apt to hire somebody that's maybe got an intellectual disability or a little bit different, and then those people. I mean, it's a change agent that is super powerful.
I want to ask about the Special Olympics as an organization. So there's this small international governing body, and then the primary workload is carried at the regional level and the state level. Every state has their own Special Olympics entity. They're structured as nonprofits. The staffs are small. Amy was telling me the full-time staff in Florida for the 2022 games was 5 people. And a tremendous feat carried by, and certainly a lot of the volunteers that you mentioned. Joe, you were the president of the 2022 games, and now Christine, you'll take over here for the 2026 games. Can you talk about how the organization is structured, and Dave, you too, because you've sat in this role for a long time. Why does this system work, and why is it so important?
Let me just go first. Yeah. So as you mentioned, we had a small staff, as do the states. Just on the structure that you outlined, every country and here in the United States, every state has their own organization. It's their own separate charitable 501c3 organization. Dave's team is small. I think you told me today, Dave, you've got 40 people doing the whole state. I had a small team doing the games. It's volunteers. We have so many volunteers. So at our games, we had almost 30,000 volunteer shifts. 30,000 volunteer shifts. And so we could not afford to pay that many people, right? Because we want the money to go to the athletes and to their competitions. So it's the volunteers. And what's really amazing about the volunteers, they came from all over the United States. You saw there must be local volunteers, people in the community that come out, spend 8 hours. We had people from Europe come. But we had many people come from California. Why? Because they come to prior games and they enjoyed it. So they take their 1 or 2 weeks of vacation from work. They hop on a plane at their own expense and they come. Because why? Because like Peter Cancro, they realize that by giving, they receive. Yeah. And they receive in a different way, not getting some assets or a fancy hotel room. And so that's the lifeblood of our organization, is our volunteers. And that's how we exist, especially out in the communities, because we are in, tens of thousands of communities here in the United States, and you couldn't have staffs in all those places. So you have coaches, and those coaches are often people who work in full-time job, have kids, and they're either maybe the high school swim coach, and they say, I'll help out. So it's just amazing how many good people are out there helping our athletes and giving our athletes an opportunity to excel in life, to gain social skills, to gain self-esteem, to gain friends, to gain some, physical abilities, and to have fun.
I would just say that to add on, because it is volunteers and it is really community focused, and every state is a different environment, right? And so you want to meet your communities where they're at, where the athletes are at, what sports are popular, how do you support those? Some have more staff, some have more volunteers, some are more school driven, and so if you couldn't really have one national body that kind of oversaw every state. It's just too different, and you would lose out. And so this way we can get the most people and meet them where they're at and support them the way we need to. The international support that we get has really, I would say, amped up because of the exposure that we get now with the global partnerships with ESPN, who came on board because we are inclusive. Before they, once unified sports came about, ESPN says, oh, this is for everybody, right. Then we're all in. The NFL, WWE. Now those partnerships at the global level, it's a bigger platform for them, and we benefit immensely from that. So those are kind of the relationships where we see back and forth.
Yeah. 2022 games was held in Orlando in June. I told you I was trying to get out there, and I was in India at the time, so unfortunately I couldn't.
You might have been the only place hotter.
Yes, that is entirely possible. But it had over 4,000 athletes. You mentioned the number of volunteers, over 30,000, 125,000 spectators. Jersey Mike's donated $20 million. So every year on the last Wednesday of the month, this year was on March 30th, Jersey Mike's donates. It's called the Day of Giving. And we've done a couple of episodes on this, and as everybody knows, Jersey Mike's is the title sponsor of the Jedburgh podcast. Peter Cancro and I has been a mentor and a friend of mine for several years now, and we appreciate so much everything that he's done for us, for launching this podcast, supporting this podcast, and getting our message out. He was on last year in December for a follow-up. We had done episode 2. Peter's on. He tells the story of Jersey Mike's, and still one of our best episodes. But then he came on in December and he said, we're going to do this thing. We're going to sponsor the Special Olympics, and we're going to give 100% of revenue on the Day of Giving next year. And I went back and I listened to this episode after he gave 100% of revenue, because I had interpreted that, as most people would, as, well, profit.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No.
But no. Right. Jersey Mike's gave every dollar that they made on that day to the Special Olympics. And if we quantify what that meant, 2 years ago I think they did $5 million. I think last year they did $8 million. And in our episode that we had done in episode 2 in March of 2021, we were excited to try to achieve the $8 million. And Peter told me again at that point, see, we have this history, and if you listen to my conversations with Peter, there's a history of him telling me things and me not believing him, and then having to go back and be like, I should have believed you. He had said, when we do this with the Special Olympics, it will blow away exponentially everything we've ever done before. And it did.
Yes.
At 20 million. You spent 4 years planning this, Joe. Amy told me in my conversation with her that the generosity that was shown this year by Jersey Mike's has changed the game for the Special Olympics. Can you talk about the relationship with Jersey Mike's, what Peter brought to the table, the relationship you built with him, sure, and how impactful it was this year?
Right. So first of all, we are so grateful to Jersey Mike's, to the entire organization, to all the franchisees who supported Special Olympics. We're just so excited. It was back in January of 2019. I was up in New Jersey. I met with Peter, and in our first meeting, he said, I'm all in. I'm going to do this. And it was one meeting. He was one of the few of our partners who didn't ask about return on investment or how many signs he was going to get. He looked at me, and we talked, and we agreed to the financial structure of the deal. And I said, okay, well, now let me talk about what we can do in return. And I always remember this. He looked at me. He goes, Joe, are you listening to me? I said, yeah, I'm listening to you. He goes, I'm giving to give.
Yep. Yeah. He's genuine about it.
Yeah. He's giving it, and I'm like, okay, but we'll still. And I can tell you some stories about how we gave some stuff back to Jersey Mike's, and he kept saying, well, couldn't you give it to somebody? Couldn't you have sold it to somebody else? Mm-hmm. I said, well, we need to do something for you. And he says, you're missing the point. And you know what? He's figured out the key. Like those volunteers who came from Europe and came from California, they've broken the code. Mm-hmm. If you give to give, it's hard for some of us because well, can you pat me in the back? Can you say, oh, good job, or that was so nice? Or, he's not doing it for that. And that's the beauty. And you say, okay, but now we're out at the stores. And we were at the stores and we announced some athletes going to the games. And they had, confetti and balloons. And then, and I went up to the guy and I put down a credit card. I said, well, here's for, all the athletes we just had in here. He goes, oh, you don't have to pay. I said, yeah, but the athletes' families came. And friends of the families came. I think they realized that, people were taking extra brownies and stuff. and I noticed they weren't keeping track at the register of what they were giving out. I said, but I got to pay. He goes, oh, you don't understand. And so this is a guy who's at the store who's got payroll, who may not be a wealthy. He says, no, you don't understand. This is our company culture here at Jersey Mike's.
Yeah.
We understand it. Yes, we're in a business, but we give. And so he's got an army of people just like him. He's built this company, which is why it's such a great company and why they, people love them, and they don't get into some of the other issues that other chains have in terms of people suing people and whatever. So it's a great company. It's a great partnership. Peter said, let's go do this. We got our states involved. We got all 50 states, even the 2 states that don't have Jersey Mike's in them yet. They all got involved. They went out to the stores. The athletes went out to the stores. We promoted on social media, and it was a great event for Jersey Mike's, and it was a great month of giving, actually, for us. We broke all records, and we have some exciting news about 2026 that I'll defer to in a second. But so anyway, great partnership. Peter's great. His management team there in headquarters is great. The whole company is great. But he cared about, and what impacted him most when he was there and when he was at the games, he wanted to be with the athletes. He didn't want to go to the corporate tent. He didn't want to sit in the suite. He wanted to be with the athletes. And that shows you, and he wanted to see the benefit. And the athletes knew who he was. They knew who Jersey Mike's, well, of course, because they were eating these great subs every day from Jersey Mike's. So it was just a great overall experience, a great partnership, and a great example of what corporate America can do. I mean, it helped Jersey Mike's. I mean, people said, wow, what a great company. So there's benefit from it. But they did it for other than numerical reasons.
Right.
And they probably got some good return on it, but that wasn't the point.
Right.
And if we could all just do a little bit more of that, I think we'd all be a little better place.
And we talk about doing what's right. We talk about integrity. Christine, before we started, you and I were talking about the 9 characteristics of performance that special operations forces use to assess and recruit and select talent. One of the key components of a lot of our conversations on the podcast when we have leadership discussions and this idea of integrity and do the right thing day in and day out for the right reason, not to try to get something, and good things will happen to you. And if they don't happen right now, keep doing the right thing. And eventually it will work out. Joe, you look back on the games. We joked that your freedom bird's almost here. That's what we used to call it. You've had a couple of months to reflect.
Yeah.
What's the highlight?
I think the highlight, and Dave asked me a similar question earlier today as we walked into the building here.
We have to give Christine a goal.
Right.
The bar is already set very high.
Right. For me, it was the joy from the athletes. Many of these athletes had never left their home state. Many had never been on an airplane before. So this was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But they came here. They got to experience, the theme parks, Walt Disney World, a great sponsor of ours. They got to experience just being with other athletes, competing, and just the opportunity to shine. Society often defines what our athletes can and can't do. They've got these preconceived notions. And our athletes went out there, they competed, and yes, Christine, the hot sun, sometimes in the rain, but mostly beautiful weather, as it normally is in Florida. And they really, the joy that they got, the joy of just being treated special. And special was just coming to a sporting event, but it really was a great opportunity. So when you spoke, and who who had the most tears were the parents.
Yeah.
The parents would come up and say, "You have no idea how my son or daughter or sister's been looking forward to this for a year. They've had COVID. We've been locked up. We're out. We're down here, in the entertainment capital of the world, and we're just experiencing all this acceptance and love." And that's what it was. It was a love fest.
Well, I mean, also, the venues were state of the art. So our athletes trained super hard. And you go back to Eunice Kennedy Shriver, and Joe, you were talking about how she pushed. Excellence in sport was a big push. It's not, let's not do something that's nice for our athletes. They got to be pushed. But then if they're at that level, they should have state-of-the-art venues. Yeah. And so to be at a world-class venue with the stands and all the pomp and circumstance that they see on other Olympic Games or pro sports or whatever, they're on the same field as those athletes. And that is a huge thing. It's a life-changing event for our athletes. Yeah. And the venues down there were spectacular.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things we continue to try to do is increase the level of competition, whether or not it's the officials, whether or not it's the physical venues, whether or not it's the level of competition. The more of that we can do, the better. But when you're putting athletes in these state-of-the-art facilities that many of them competed in, it really just raises the whole level and helps society's perception. And then we had ESPN televising it, and they can see, oh, look, wow, right? These are very competitive events. These are athletes who are out there. They've got some cases, some physical challenges, and they've been not able to train as much because of COVID, and they're out there and they're competing and trying harder than sometimes our professional athletes do. What's that say?
I think if we think about where we go from here too, because the 2022 games were exceptional, Joe. You and the team have so much to be proud of, and we have very big shoes to fill. But I think if we think about the athletes, and as you were saying, Dave, just that level of competitive pursuit, health and wellness is something that we're thinking a lot about, right, as the theme of the games and as a legacy that we want to leave. So how do we think about what's our run-up to the game, not just in terms of getting ready for an event, but how do we think about athlete readiness and health and wellness and their training regimes? And then how do we think about the platform that this gives us for what's after the 2026 games in terms of where they take their competitive careers from there and overall health and wellness?
That's excellent. There's just one point, we talk about people's preconceived notions as to what Special Olympics does. They think we're a sporting organization for children, which we're not. So we just defined it's I think the oldest Special Olympic athlete in the United States now is in their 90s.
Wow.
But we are more than a sports organization. There's actually 4 pillars that we have, and one of them is sports. The other big one I'd like to spend just 1 minute on is we are the largest health organization for people with intellectual disabilities in the world. And one of the things we did at the games, we did over 13,000 health exams for our athletes. Yes, 13,000 health exams. We had literally hundreds of healthcare professionals doing one of 7 different health exams, as you would expect, hearing, eyesight, dentistry, podiatry, healthy minds, etc. And so we were able to do these health exams because we found, surprise, surprise, if our athletes are not healthy, they don't compete as well.
Right.
David talked about the level of competition, and so we want to raise the level of competition, and you can't do that if you can't see or hear properly. And we had some great stories. If we had some more time, I could tell you about the athletes who could not hear. They were deaf their whole life. They came to Orlando. They had some specialized testing done, and they were fitted with custom new state-of-the-art hearing aids. And even though doctors had told them their whole life they could not hear, we had one athlete from Maryland, 45 years old, could hear for the first time.
Wow.
Okay, and that is...
That's the impact.
And not like couldn't hear well. No, deaf,
right.
Whole life. And doctors had said, I'm sorry, it turns out because some of our athletes are nonverbal, sometimes it's very difficult to figure out what the issue was. But our good friends at Starkey had some really high-tech equipment that had never been used before on our athletes. And we fitted our athletes with over 100 hearing aids. And we had, of our 4,000 athletes, 1,000 of them walked in for eye test and either needed glasses and didn't have them, or had the wrong glasses. And we had almost the same with feet, wrong size shoes, wrong size arches. And you look at these numbers and you say, how could that be? How could these people not be properly? And then you look at society and look at where we are with healthcare. And then you look at our athletes sometimes who come from lower socioeconomic or can't communicate what their issues are. But then you get them in front of some trained professionals. So we make a big difference not only on the field, but from a health perspective.
You're changing lives.
Changing lives, really.
Absolutely changing
That's
lives.
the secret sauce. So the health piece of it, sports is great. But for me, I was just surprised how much we can do to help the health of our athletes. And by the way, our Healthy Athlete program is opened up. It's not just for people with intellectual disabilities who are in Special Olympics. We open up to anybody, at least we do in several states, to let people come in. So that's one of the areas that you really would hope we continue to grow, especially as our country grapples with the healthcare crisis that we have.
What's the next 4 years look like as prep for the 2026 games?
Well, I think dovetailing up the comments, again, this platform of health and wellness for our athletes will be a big focus for us. Yeah. We got a lot of work to do, but I'm really inspired by what's ahead and the opportunity to just host an amazing event and use the platform to continue to do good things.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the marketing of Special Olympics and people really understanding what we're all about is probably one of our biggest challenges as a movement. So this gives us, selfishly in the state of Minnesota, but to really get every corner of the state involved in these games. And as I mentioned, we want to get every school involved in some way, shape, or form. And it's really led by students, and it's led by our athletes. We've already set up athlete leadership committees and student advisory groups to help us so that they are the ones driving the actions, the activations, and what have you that get every school, every community. We have an urban initiative with our unified schools, so we're working with the Minneapolis public schools, and we're also, next year we'll be targeting St. Paul, but there's other communities that we don't serve historically just because we don't have an entree there. And so this new platform for, with the USA Games coming here gives us a really great calling card to go out to the Somali community, to go out to the Hispanic community, to go out to the Hmong community, which are large populations here in Minnesota, as well as the African American community in the urban setting, and invite them to participate, invite them to plan, and invite them to be a part of this. And if we didn't have the games coming, it would be a longer haul. This gives us a shorter window to activate and get more people involved. So we're really excited about that.
Joe said you had an announcement.
Well, we're very, very appreciative of Jersey Mike's willingness to be a presenting sponsor for us for 2026. So, again, to Peter and his team's generosity, it gives us a running start in a really important way. So,
awesome, that's wonderful, and you can count on us coming out as well to be here. So we got 4 years.
Second visit.
Second visit, right?
Second visit.
That you owe beer on the second visit. So we got 4 years to plan it now. Special Olympics has embarked on this campaign called Revolution is Inclusion. They're calling for all of us to be a part of a powerful new generation that celebrates all differences, all abilities. So much of inclusivity and inclusion, diversity, equity, I believe comes down to communication. How effectively are we able to spread our message? How do we interact with other people? You talked about giving, Joe, and you talked about opening your heart and being accepting of other people. And I think that is summed up so much in this revolution is inclusion. And I love how also when they Special Olympics talks about it, they say this is a peaceful representation of revolution because that's so different than when we normally talk about rebellion and revolution. But they've talked about the need to communicate with respect, compassion, and care. Why does it start there?
I think that, like I was talking about, the invitation, inviting people to belong is, a really important factor, and not just noticing people, but inviting them to be a part of the movement. And if you meet people where they're at and they feel welcomed, and they feel respected, and they feel heard, those are the things that make you feel like you belong somewhere, and that's really what this movement does. And like I said a little earlier, we're pushing even more so to be led by our athletes and led by our students, because they are the one that, like you say, are going to carry this next generation. We can all talk about it intellectually, but you have to really make a concerted effort to live it when you're my age and you've been, been around for so long. But our youth is changing that already. You see that in the schools. And so we really need to lean on them to help lead us going forward.
I think it ultimately comes down to acceptance. And inclusion has to be there to be accepted. If you haven't been included, they're not going to understand your journey. They're not going to understand what's important to you, and you're ultimately not going to be accepted. So I think this inclusion revolution is critical to, the future that we all want to live in.
I'm going to keep you in the hot seat for 1 second here, Christine. As we close out, the Jedburghs had to do 3 things to be effective during World War II. They were their habits. I call them foundations. They had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, and they had to be able to communicate. If they trained and they did these things with the utmost precision, then they could focus their attention on more complex challenges that came their way every day that they had to solve. As you look across the calendar for the next several years, and you've gone through the planning here over the last couple of days, what are the 3 things that you're going to do every day to set the conditions for the success of the 2026 games?
The 3 things every day. I think first it's waking up every day, appreciating and keeping in the forefront the mission, right? The mission is about athletes. It's about an athlete experience and athlete acceptance, as we were just talking about. I think the second thing is surrounding us, right, with a team of people that are committed to the mission, care deeply about it, and are prepared to work very hard to put an amazing event forward. And I think third is about the legacy, not just thinking about the event, right? Because I think we could all put together an amazing event for a week in June of 2026, but really thinking about the legacy that we want to leave. How do we think about the platform that we have for the next 4 years running up to the event here? And how do we think about the legacy that we want to leave, in the aftermath of it? And I think if we get all 3 of those things right, we'll be in a really great place.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Athletes first, legacy. That's all. It's a good team. You got a good team. You can do the other 2.
You summed it up for me. I normally do that. The new host of the podcast. Those are incredible. Keep the mission in the forefront. Surround yourself with a team of people committed to work hard and dedicated to that mission. And remember the legacy, past, present, and what's the legacy that you're going to leave for the future. We talk about these 9 characteristics: drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, curiosity, team ability, effective intelligence, and emotional strength. To put these games on, to be in this organization, to compete in this organization, be a part of it in whatever way you choose. You really do need all 9 of these. We talked about a couple of them in detail, but at the end of these conversations, I think about one that summarizes what we talked about and what I see here. And for me, it's integrity. It's about doing what's right. This started in 1962 with Eunice Kennedy Shriver on this mission that she embarked. She had the drive, she had the courage, we talked about courage, to stand up in front of the world and say, this is a demographic of the population that we care about, that is valued in society, that we will learn from if we will bring them in. And that started with the daylight of 1968 games. It continues to this day. It continues through people who are dedicated to the mission, as the 3 of you are. It continues with people who are willing to give like Jersey Mike's and the other sponsors and everybody who volunteers. It's been a pleasure to come here to Minneapolis for the first time. Sit down with you. I appreciate your generosity, your time. I look forward to the next 4 years, following up periodically to figure out where we're at, what we're planning, and then being back here to cover the games. Joe, you're going back to Florida here in a few minutes and going to relax for a little bit, but I know you will be here when it kicks off. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for
having us.
Thanks for the
Thank you very
opportunity
much.
to talk. Thank you.
American Jedburghs went out to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other behind-the-scenes content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, Talent War Group, and our sponsor Jersey Mike Subs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast and Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.